Hello, welcome to the Coffee and Technology Podcast by Cropster. I'm Nick Castellano, and I'm here with my co-host, Norbert Niederhauser. In today's episode, we speak with Raphael Studer. Raphael is the co-founder and CEO of Algrano. Raphael has a PhD in economics and has spent a significant amount of time at Origin understanding how to empower those in Origin. Raphael brings his perspective on the democratization of information in the coffee value chain, the challenges and opportunities of empowering producers, and blockchain's place and impact in coffee. Hope you enjoy.
Nick, what do you say?
All is good. All is good.
Alles good.
Let's do this. Let's get to it. Norbert, I'm excited, man. You know, this is a very tech-focused episode now. I always get stoked when I listen to multiple tech people in the room. It's a different perspective for me. So I'm excited for today, man.
Yeah, me too. This will be a good one. And we have our guest today,
Raphael Studer. Welcome to the podcast, man. How are you?
Very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be invited. Thanks a lot for having me.
Absolutely. Just to kind of get started, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do at Algrano, even a little bit about how Algrano got started, how you got started with Algrano. And then, we can start from there.
Yeah, sure. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Algrano. Algrano started actually 2005, when I decided to move in with a guy called Gilles in Geneva during my university time. He had a room to let, and we became flatmates. And 10 years later, he ended up in a sustainability department of a coffee trader, and I ended up as an energy trader after my PhD in econometrics. And he called me and he said, "Hey, there's something amazing happening in the coffee fields in Brazil," where he was living at that time. And he said, the amazing thing is that coffee producers have smartphones and access to 3G, and we should leverage that. And, I traveled to Brazil. He invited the third guy called Christian, who is a physicist. And the three of us became co-founder of what is today Algrano. At that time, we didn't know what it will be. We just knew there was an opportunity. And today we are a marketplace where coffee roasters and coffee producers trade directly online, where we connect roasters to coffee producers and coffee producers to roasters. And we care about the little details of logistics and finance to make, these trades happen and execute these trades, because that's often, of course, a barrier for both of them to trade directly. Today we are based in Europe. We are around 30 employees, Q graders, former coffee roasters, software engineers. So I think we fit pretty well in your podcast, Nick and Norbert. Coffee and tech.
Yeah. That's perfect. Tell us a little bit more about what. So where does the coffees come from? What origins, and what is your target markets for now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we started. I think. But that you iterate and you go from small to more and more and more, and at the beginning you have this huge plant. I think if we would follow our first business plan, we would be now offering a platform for nuts and cocoa, and we were dreaming big.
Same as Cropster. Awesome.
The reality is different. We're still in coffee, but we are serving now, I think, around 400 roasters in 30 countries in Europe. And these roasters are buying from around something more than 200 coffee growers in 18 countries. The countries are mostly in Latin America and Africa.
Nice. I'm curious, what's been kind of, since Algrano started and kind of grown, so obviously a lot of producers love this platform. It's opportunity on the web to be able to connect with roasters worldwide or in Europe. But what's been the kind of the level of, like, I guess, interest or growth that roasters have in trying to now be even more involved now that they can through Algrano when they're not able to go to Origin? Like, has that interest kind of grown more, or what's that look like for roasters in Europe?
Yeah, I think, to understand what the benefits that Algrano bring to roasters, I think we need to look at how usually a roaster buys coffee. In a traditional supply chain, you the traditional supply chain is driven by ownership. You buy a coffee, you sell a coffee, you buy a coffee, you sell a coffee. And Algrano had this idea that, maybe that's not the right incentive to own a coffee to resell it. I might be tempted to not say how much I paid for it. I might be tempted to pay less that I earn more, etc. So there's just incentives that might not be the right ones. Number one, and number two, with owning a coffee, information travels only in one direction. So I buy it from you, I know from whom I bought, and I know to whom I sold. But the guy to whom I sell does not know from whom I bought it. So there's an information that travels only in one direction, and it's an information asymmetry. And what we with this platform solve, where roasters and growers are connected directly, is basically that information flows in both ways. So suddenly transparency is a given. So I know what I pay the grower because I'm negotiating with him. And the grower knows to whom he's selling because he's talking to the roaster. And, one thing we often hear when we ask growers and roasters, why do you work with us? It's not about I pay less or I earn more. It's about I know with whom I'm working. And this is really strong. This is we're always saying coffee is a people's industry, and it is.
Mm-hmm. So this is very, very different from how, direct trade is I think the underlying concept, right? We have seen emerging 15 years ago when roasters started to travel and find those farmers, find those origins. But you add a lot more services to that, right? So you do the trading part of it, you do the financing part of it. So where can it go from here?
Yeah, I think you're putting it right. We're kind of combining the two worlds, right? So we realize that direct trade for a lot of roasters is impossible. They don't have the critical size to fill up a full container. They don't have the import licenses to bring in coffee. They sometimes they don't speak the language the producer speaks. They don't know how to, that there is ethics risks, so currency risks involved, etc., etc. And all these services in the traditional chain, they are offered, right? And what we wanted to build is a system that is fully inclusive in the sense of everybody can do direct trade, no matter the size. So, really inspired also by the shared economy. We share containers together to bring these coffees, and to plug to it the services that in the traditional chain exist. So you mentioned it, import, financing, quality assurance, warehousing of the coffees. But we do it with a service provider mentality. So it's like when you check out in a flight ticket, and you add a seat and a better meal, and it's actually what the roaster does on our platform. He adds warehousing, he adds financing, and with every service he adds, he sees the price increase because there's a service that has to be paid for. And what is really interesting, the grower sees it as well. So that's again this idea of transparency and information going both ways. We want to also make sure that growers become successful and learn from the market. So what does it mean to bring a coffee to Germany? What does it mean to if it's paid in euros and currencies have to be hedged? What does it mean? And we happen to do this through an online platform because it's just more efficient. But of course, you could do this also on a phone, for sure.
So I just had this idea in my head. When you buy more directly from the producer, a lot of times you get better prices. At least I know when I go to certain vineyards or wineries in Austria, well, the price there is amazing, and then you go to a supermarket and it's different, of course. Also, the service level of a supermarket is very different. I don't have to drive long ways. I have a bigger selection and. So that's kind of maybe a little bit of like a, I don't know if it's a difficult question, but that also was part of direct trade at some point, to go more directly to the producers, to control prices, but also to get better prices. Where does the whole quality paying more and paying sustainable prices come in, and how does that pan out?
Mhm. Yeah, what we see is the more the grower can integrate vertically, so the closer he gets with his service level to the roaster. So if he can mill, if he can export, the more he's able to grab, the more value he's able to grab. And I mentioned the service provider side on Algrano on the importing side, but we are providing the same services also to growers who do not have these services. So we are working with mills, we're working with exporters who provide a service to growers who are not able to mill, and they do it on a flat fee. And like this, we are able to actually redistribute a lot of value down to the grower without compromising on a lower price, or without, and that's basically the idea of it. It's build a DHL for coffee from the grower to the roaster, make very clear what the services are and how much they cost. And no matter whether the coffee is $8 a kilogram or $4 a kilogram, the service that has to be provided is the same, and it should cost the same. And punto. And that's the idea.
So you go away from a percentage
Correct.
of a sales price to fixed fees,
Correct.
Depending on.
Correct.
On
And that means that the specialty premium that most of direct trade, it happens in the specialty sector, the specialty premium really goes down, because all the services in between, they're actually fixed. They're fixed. So any cent that is paid for quality goes down to whom produced that quality, the producer.
And what do you see in terms of like farm prices? When we speak about the farmer a little bit more, sometimes it's hard, in my belief or my experience, to know the production cost. They don't sometimes know what to price their products. How does it work?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it's exactly these iterations I mentioned before. When we started, when we went to Brazil and we talked to the first coffee producers, and Chile organized a trip for me, I was still working as an energy trader. I met this producer, Alessandro, and he's our poster producer. We're still working with him, and he's super successful on Algrano. And he told me, I told him, I want to build an app that helps you calculate production costs. And he's like, no, I just want to have a way to sell my coffee. And once I sold my coffee, let's think about how I produce it, etc. And the first thing we realized is we want to build market access. And also the first feature we built was offering coffee online. And a year later, we started to build a feature buying coffee online. and a year later, we realized coffee roasters need to plan ahead, and they need to execute their orders, so track shipments and warehouses. So we started to build execution features. And only now, now we're 7 years in the market, and only now we're basically going back to the producer, and because we see that metrics and data and platform usage, etc., works, and we're thinking about how can we leverage the data that we collected on buying, on prices, how can we leverage that data and give it back to producers. And that's basically we call it the My Customer. It's a CRM, a customer relationship management tool we built for coffee growers. And it is exactly what you mentioned. It's like we help them, we give them price guidance, we give them also guidance who might be a good roaster to offer the coffee to, because not all the roasters have a need for the same coffees. We want to make it growers as successful as possible, to target the audience you're talking to. We are helping coffee producers also in by the way we tell them who ordered a sample, how did the sample cup. So that's very, very important. It's something we forget a lot. It's like sometimes a coffee producer is not just interested in hearing that roaster bought it. Sometimes for a coffee producer, it's even more interesting understanding why the roaster did not buy it. Was it too expensive? Was it not the quality he was looking for? And these feedback loops, this data that we collected, what we have been focusing the last 12 months was really how do we give this data back to the coffee producers.
And on that level, I have worked with quite a number of coffee producers, and on different scale, so larger scale and very, very small scale. How do you do that efficiently? And how you mentioned it right from the start, like you came into play because there were cell phones, and I believe that is a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
But still, how can you address or access in different markets, in different languages, in different cultures, people with a certain level of technology or a certain level of knowledge?
Yeah, it's very
What
interesting.
are the learnings?
Yeah, it's very interesting. You know, at the beginning, we had to push for growers, right? So we traveled through. I mean, we started 3 of us, so we traveled through Nicaragua. You know, we had workshops with producers, and it was very frustrating because we ended up, you know, we talked to 40 producers, and we ended up with one who was actually, you know, really willing to go the way, you know, offer coffee online, do the work, and what we on the way basically learned is that coffee has, I think, experienced also generational shift, and we see a lot of, or the most successful producers in Algrano are younger producers, and or family-owned businesses who have young generations who help in the sales and marketing of the coffee. And this has become really our focus to identify, this next gen of coffee producers who is interested in developing direct trade relationships. And how do we do it is we try to address or to get to them through the channels where they will also use us. So there are WhatsApp groups in producing countries. So we try to get into the WhatsApp groups that, you know, growers who use WhatsApp, they will also use their smartphone to connect to Algrano. So we try to go through these channels, but we tried so many things that did not work with national organizations, with workshops. We even had ads in newspapers.
Amazing.
We tried everything, but what seems to pay off is really growers talking about us, about their experience in a WhatsApp group. That's number one channel for us to get to new producers, and then it's pretty obvious who will be successful, because at the beginning you see how they are engaged, how quick they reply to roasters, how their profiles look like on Algrano, you know, with videos, with pictures, and very, very soon you will see that, and that's really a correlation we see in the data. Activity, engagement with roasters makes you successful as a seller.
Yeah, I can only really speak on like Colombia because I've spent the most amount of time here, but that's one thing I found what you just said interesting is that here's in Colombia especially is like people really end up doing things at the end of the day when their peers or their neighbors are doing something and they're succeeding at it. It's a word of mouth, you know, that's like the best form of marketing, they say, word of mouth.
Yeah.
And I mean, it seems like that's been the case though in most origins, or have you just noticed that in Latin America or Africa, or where's that really been like the prevalent of like this? Well, my neighbor's doing it, so now I should.
Yeah, you know, that was really at the beginning was really hard because we had to push for new growers. Now we're in a privileged situation thanks to, you know, we won twice the Specialty Coffee Award, and they talk about you, and you get suddenly you get signups and on the platform, and now we're in the privileged situation that if we think about let's open Rwanda, we have a pool of maybe 40 or 50 producers who have already signed up from Rwanda. So we can then also be handpicked with whom do we want to start. We do the first due diligence, and we really want to make a very successful first case in a new country, because it's exactly then what you said. It's this mouth to mouth that will at the end then make us successful in a new origin country where we start. And that's how we we do it now. So basically, we have a team of 3 people who are just looking at with whom do we want to work and which country is next, and to make sure that we also have a trustworthy, and there's something like a verified seller tag on Algrano, where you really see like, okay, this has been, there's been an audit, there's been due diligence behind, and
it must be very scary. I mean, for all those platforms like Airbnb and any platform which basically aggregates smaller businesses or people, how do they guarantee it's delivered? Because how when I book on Airbnb, right, I go there and I believe that there will be a key and there will be an apartment and there will be something similar to what the pictures look like, right? And it honestly, for me, it had worked out fantastically so far. But for your farmers, it's about the same thing, right? So there's I don't know, a roaster in Germany ordering that coffee and expecting a certain quality, which is substantially more complex, I believe, than an apartment listing. To guarantee delivery in time, same quality, and same quantity, ideally, at still the same price, which was agreed.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely. It's a very good. It's a very good comparison, because it's even worse. Right? It's like an Airbnb at 10 p.m. or you come and you're looking for the key.
Yeah.
Like okay, I mean, I'm in Brooklyn and it's midnight, and because it's exactly that's what it is for the roaster, right? Because he orders a Brazilian. He orders Brazil once a year, and if that supply does not show up, what is going to happen to my packaging and to my next year of next months of roasting? I will need to go to the spot and I will need to grab what is left over. Exactly. So it's a very good comparison. And how do we counter this is through 2 approaches. One is traditional quality assurance, as everybody else does. So, taking samples on the way, comparing qualities, taking weight notes on the way to make sure the quantities are there. So we do it. We have a lab and we have 2 people working there, and that's their job. So that's the traditional way. But what we also try more and more is relying on data. So, for instance, what you see on Algrano is, as a roaster, you see how many successful trades has a grower had with how many roasters. Are roasters coming back and rebuying or not? So a grower is able to build up a track record that will hopefully create trust for new buyers. And I think this is a really nice example, because again, it lifts out the producer out of the darkness, and he starts to build up his own brand, and he will, he knows that this data is public, so he also has an incentive to deliver the coffee, and that's one thing. And the other thing is, on the way also we track a few indicators. So we have a few probability measures. Are the booking documents for the container at the right time? Have the PSS been sent at this time interval? And this helps us predict delivery times, because delivery, you don't want to end up with a empty silo in your roastery or an empty pallet. And so we want to make sure that we can give you the best forecast of when your coffee is going to arrive. And we do this, again, automatically. We do this in weekly digest emails, logistic updates to the roasters, where they see basically, is it going into red? Is it still green? And that gives you then 4 to 8 weeks advance in also taking a reaction if there is a delay, and that helps. You don't want to learn about it the day before your coffee should arrive that it's late. So
and then comes COVID and everything changes.
Yeah, exactly. So that has been for our logistics department, I think, the worst year. Yeah, exactly. Or worst 2 years.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Enjoying this episode of the Coffee and Technology podcast? This podcast would not be possible without the support of Cropster. Whether it's tracking harvest yields, roastery and inventory management, or simply tracking brew recipes, Cropster Origin, Cropster Roast, and Cropster Cafe can help you streamline your workflows and help you operate more efficiently.
So obviously too, like, Algrano can't be at all the origins all the time, obviously. So what's been kind of like has there been an increase of like more producers taking upon like their own quality control, their own QA, and kind of taking up more cuppings and learning that part of post processing and quality control? I mean, has it increased over the years or since Algrano started, or what's that kind of look like?
Yeah, well, we definitely see that producers get more comfortable with jumping into the seller's role to talk directly to roasters. And that has always been our goal, right? To provide tech features where they can talk directly and sell directly and take responsibility for their product and for their sales process, and own the relationship, right, with the roaster. And that we definitely see, because that had also been a mindset shift for them, right? It's like, what do I have to do? How do I have to behave? Should I write once a month, once a year? That it has to be learned. And and I think they're doing really, really well. And we had an amazing event there was a World of Coffee in Milano, the European show of coffee show organized by the Specialty Coffee Association. And we organized a side event with around 50 producers from 13 countries. And they were giving advice to each other, how they were using the features. And, one guy was super sophisticated and he said, like, every third message I send, I get a sale, and I do it like this. And he was, showing the text he was sending. And it was like, it's exactly as what you said. 7 years ago, I could not have imagined that this will happen. And now really, this vision of successful sellers, growers as sellers, is starting to realize. And we see, that's on the sales process, but we see the same happening on quality. Growers starting to buy small sample roasting equipment to be able to do cuppings themselves. So now we also have the option on the Algrano website where they can list their scoring next to our scoring, to be fully transparent on also on quality. So how does the producer assess it? How do we as a neutral party assess it? And then how does the roaster assess it? So it's not my coffee. I can give you my advice, or my lab can give you an advice on it. Maybe it's 2 points lower, maybe 2 points higher than the grower assessment.
Right. Raphael, I would say this is a landslide paradigm shift you're supporting here. I mean, we are going from a paternalistic, colonial style trading model into a free world direct trading model, and the shift and responsibility. All the keywords, I just heard them, right? Yeah, responsibility. Everybody takes responsibility for their own part in the game, and that's amazing. And that comes at a cost, but it also comes at a huge return. Of all, like, you feel more ownership, you feel more connected. Everything, I would say, makes more sense for everybody in the supply chain. So this is great, and what you just said, like bringing the users together, like it reminds me of the early days of the Apple Developer Conference, where people would fly to San Francisco and it's like, what is the new operating system look like, and what are the new tools available? And then all the developers and geeks would be inspired by trainings as well as peers, what they have done. And that's sometimes even more inspiring, what their peers are doing, than what the company is presenting.
Absolutely.
So congratulations to that concept.
But thanks a lot for what you just said. It means a lot to me, because of course when we started, you were in the game. You were the first tech company, I think, in coffee, and we always looked up to Cropster, and then still do. And I think this is so phenomenal to see in our industry, that there's so much potential with. We are not doing. But what I said before is, like, we're using smartphones. The fact that people have smartphones, we are not talking about deep tech. We are not talking about, it's a simple fact that there is hardware distributed. And I have a beautiful picture in mind. One of my first origin trips in Nicaragua, there was literally a horse a pickup car, and on top of them was a banner saying Nueva Cobertura 3G. So 3G arrived in this village, and it was so nice to see because with the horse, I think the coffee grower was able to sell on the local market. With the car, he could maybe drive to Managua and sell to an exporter in Managua. And with 3G, basically the world is open. And I think there is so much opportunity in our industry. With little things, we can really have an impact and change how not just coffee is traded, but how things are done, how quality is assessed, how quality is consistently replicated. So there's so much opportunity, and it just needs a good flatmate and a trip to Brazil.
Can we talk a second also about the roaster? Because I feel a lot of our listeners are in that segment, and what has changed for them? What do you have any success stories, feedback, anything you would say has shifted for them by adopting new buying practices, which amongst others are what you're offering?
I mean, what we heard heard a lot from roasters was that they were contacted, through Instagram, through Facebook, through LinkedIn from coffee producers, that they had coffee producers showing up in the roastery with samples. And actually the discussion always ended at a producer saying a price in reais or in pesos, and nobody knowing how to bring it in and how to basically, even though they liked each other, and even though they liked the coffee, and even though they would love to work together, there was a barrier. And I think for those roasters, interested in building such relationship, we offer them a free of charge tool to just systematically go through this process with literally a few clicks. And I think for those roasters, a dream has come true. And then there is another category of roasters who maybe had never thought about doing buying at origin, and discovers through Algrano what it means to have a larger choice, because you don't choose from an offer list anymore. You choose from a farm, from a portfolio from a farm. You choose from a region. You suddenly you can have maybe your exclusive lot. Suddenly you can understand exactly how this coffee was produced, because the farmer tells you and who did it. And what we see is that those roasters often then go above actually quality. They go into other variables like values, shared values. They go, what we see is we have a large cooperative retail chain. There's a cooperative. They want to work with cooperatives. We have a family office, a family owned roastery. They want to work only with family owned producers. So it's these shared values, and that then also builds a very consistent and credible story to the end consumer. It strengthens their brand. It strengthens their differentiator, their USP, because they literally shape the supply chain to their USP, to the customers. And that's very, very, very strong, I think, because it's this. I think we will, for me, if I look a bit at the trends, I think the coffee in the future will not just be a scoring and an altitude. It will need credible credible stories to it that strengthen the USP and the value propositions of a roaster. And that is certainly possible through direct trade. And then there is another category of roasters that are not interested in specialty coffee, knowing where the coffee is coming from. There is still a huge commodity market, and that's certainly the segment that we are not serving.
So that makes me think of something, because when you mentioned, I think of this because Algrano, the more Algrano develops, the more Cropster develops, the more just technology and coffee develops, the more transparent things will be, whether some people like it or not. Like just how we're moving forward.
So I'm wondering if you found that to be a challenge, though. It's like the more transparent you become, do you kind of just say like, well, sorry, like that's kind of the move we're making, or do you have this mentality of like, this is just how the future's going to be, it's how it's going to be a sustainable industry? Does that make sense? Because it's like I said, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but in North America, I'm sure there's still a ton of big roasters that just at the end of the day don't want to be as transparent as maybe they say they are, or they want to be. And I feel like it's inevitable at this point.
Yeah, I believe in structural change, and I believe we are in a, whether it's generational driven, whether it's technology driven, but I believe in, especially the food and beverage industry, we observe such a structural change. It's not just coffee. It's I want to know where my food is coming from. I want to know how it's produced. I want to have control over it. It's going into my body, and I can make very simple, just with my purchasing decision, I can make a difference. It's very simple. It's in my daily purchasing that I can change how our planet will look like, how people will live. It's very simple, right? And I think this is it. I can give you an example because you related to Europe. We have in Europe laws coming out in the European Union. In Switzerland, which does not belong to the European Union, but we have laws forcing companies to be transparent about their supply chains if they're in the food and beverage industry. So there's even political pressure coming. It's not just consumers' pressure; it's political pressure. And I think this is a trend that is not stoppable. And now we can, react to it, and just when there is a new law, adapt to it. And we chose another approach, is we fire that up and we give exactly those people who want to do this, we give them the tools to do it. And I think, is a winning strategy, honestly, to let people do what they want to, and what they, have fun with, and what they want to achieve. And the fact that, as I just mentioned before, technology, and as you mentioned, technology can do it, helps us. I can give you an example about transparency at Algrano. The beginning, we had a lot of, people from the coffee industry signing up on the platform that are not coffee roasters and coffee producers, as you can imagine. So we were wondering, should we delete these accounts? Should we, and we were like, no. I mean, let's be transparent. We have nothing to hide. There's these producers selling these coffees for these prices. If you believe you get a competitive advantage, if you have access to this data, use it. Use it. At the end of the day, we don't believe it's price that will make people joining our movement. Now we're transparent by heart.
That is awesome, and I feel that's kind of scariness of the whole shift, and that's always, I think, a shift into a new system is always scary, and it's always uncertain, and I think there's still a lot to be learned and to be tried out and to be adopted. Especially we were just talking about the brand the farmers develop, right? That is for the buying side of things, that can be a scary thought. They all have their own brands, which also means they all have their own identity, and they have their own market access. So it's like, now as a buyer, I have a different position. I mean, which can, being used to being a price, what do you say, to give the price or to set the price into a price taker, right? So it's like, well, my brand is now has that value, and that's what I'm selling for. That can be very, very scary and unusual in a way. Not only that it has an economic implication, but it also has an implication on how I feel about that economic relationship, or that relationship in general.
Yeah, I agree. We have I think the coffee producers have been used to be price takers, and the more, if you think about, there's a lot of Brazil Santos out there in the world, right? Santos is a port in Brazil. There's not one coffee tree. So, you know,
You're the third person on the podcast to say that. It's hilarious.
Okay. So you see, so you invite the right people, guys. I think this is amazing. This is amazing if you think about this, because if you build up a brand which is called Brazil Santos, where you can group 1/3 of the world production behind it, it offers you a lot of arbitrage. It offers you a lot to play because it's a commodity. It does not matter. And you can set prices, and you can, you know, and you can mix it, and you can blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of opportunity there in being, and it's a degree of intransparency. And product differentiation that basically happens exactly as you said with the brands that producers develop, should not be feared, because there is a very famous Mr. Akerlof. He won a Nobel Prize for exactly this finding, is that with product differentiation, you do not distribute the cake differently, but you grow the cake. And this is very important to understand. You know, if the roaster then is also able to differentiate his product better, to get a better price he will get also a better price for his product. And I'm always referring to when you buy a car. When you buy a car, it's so smart. You know, you buy an engine, but you choose whether you want to have leather seats, whether you want to have fully automatic AC or not, and you add options, and and the product I buy is totally different than the product Nick buys or Norbert buys, even though we buy exactly the same car. You know, and I think this is what we need to learn in coffee, is to differentiate the products to the end consumers, and then we will grow the cake. And we will not redistribute it. And we should not fear that. We should actually profit all from that.
And that's the moment where I say PhD studies do pay off.
I never won the Nobel Prize, though.
No, but at least you understand the concept. And you can bring it to us.
True.
Thank you. No, this is amazing, Raphael. Really, I really enjoyed the journey through all the thoughts and all the development. Very, very happy that we have this relationship, this friendship we have developed over the years. As it is true, I think together there's so much more we can do. There's so much more to change, and also having a little bit of fun along the way, I think is also quite important.
True.
So thank you for that spirit.
Thank you too.
Yeah, I actually just want to go out on a limb really quick before we finish up, and we don't have to speak on this if you don't want, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on so before I say what it is, the more talk about transparency and the further we get on this topic and the further we move forward with it, what are your thoughts, I guess, or maybe your perception of smart contracts in coffee, blockchain? I think in theory, to me, as a young person, it sounds great. It keeps things extremely transparent. And I feel and this is just my opinion, but I feel that right now it's still difficult to implement because it's so transparent, and adopting those kind of technologies is still to this day, I would say, a little risky. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on all of that?
It took us so long to get the blockchain question, Norbert.
Here it is. So, and you are in the wonderful position to take that one.
And Norbert and the other co-founders of Cropster and Algrano, we often have this discussion about. So I believe there is applications where it's very helpful, and I think it's especially in the financial space, where you want to make sure that you finance one contract and nobody else finances the same contract, etc. So you want to have a shared database where everybody can have access to verify that. And I think that in such a space, it makes a lot of sense. The contract per se is not transparent. The contract per se, you need to figure out which data is going in there and which data will be made available. And I think, just having the contract and one data point, and that data point is is unfortunately also not the right data point that is stored there. That's the issue that is still not solved. And I think especially if you think about physical execution of coffee contracts, so shipping and moisture levels, etc., you could think of sensors, and you could think of third parties that feed this data in and this data, and etc. But at the end of the day, what we decided for is, we said, let's make sure that Algrano is a trusted party, where people trust the data that they get, where people do not question that we tweak data, and then this is not needed for maybe for the moment. Maybe one day it is needed that there is a third party, etc., that verifies it. But for the moment, it's not needed. So we decided not to go that way. That was diplomatic, Norbert, no?
Yeah, great. It's awesome. No, but it's exactly, I think, what it boils down to. It's the application, but the challenge here is that you have a physical product moving in a physical world, and then a data point moving in the data world. And if you only track and trace and verify the data point, as you just said, it's disconnected from the physical world. And that connection is so important to guarantee that actually the right coffee arrives, and actually the right quality arrives, and the quantity and all those things. So just making sure that the data is stored, that we can do, and that's also a little bit my other thing, is like, what is the best method for doing it? Because databases are old. We have them for a very long time. They get better depending on application. I still remember a very inspiring communication I had, or a conversation I had, 2003, with a guy who said, I'm developing a new database. And I told him, dude, why would you do that? We already have all those databases. And he said, I do that because I developed a database for and if we come back to the cell phone, for the telecommunication industry, because cell phone connections, there is millions of transactions happening in a second, and old database systems are just not able to process that data quick enough. I was like, this is a very interesting point. Some can overlook very very easily, like, because if you just have a few users on your database, and they have a transaction every second, or even 1,000 transactions a second, is not an issue. But millions become an issue, and that's where the whole discussion becomes or gets interesting. Also with blockchains and distributed ledgers and all those technologies. Like, what are the specifics, and what can we use them for?
Yeah,
so
I would also ask.
I don't hate the question anymore, as I did in the beginning, but I think it's important to also educate, like, what are we talking about actually?
And I think we often, the discussion often came down to, we were thinking about what can we do with it, and I think at the beginning of the podcast I said, what we are doing, you could do on the phone. It's the why. It's like we want to connect coffee roasters and producers. Okay, how do we do it? Yeah, it's through a platform. So, but I think we lost a bit that approach when we talk about blockchain, or at least in the last years. It was a lot about what can we do with it, for what can we use it, instead of why.
Yeah, and just that fact, just because you have something on a blockchain doesn't mean that it is more transparent, more accurate, better, or in any way, right? And I sometimes, that shortcut was not clear to me. Like, why would I say this is better? Now, if you give me the reasons and show me the exact specific application, it might be actually better. But so far, we have seen in we store in Cropster, we store millions of data points every second, and we're totally fine with traditional, and actually substantial cheaper for everybody, not only in terms of economic sense, but also in energy sense, which becomes increasingly, of course, also economic pressure. But it is important, like, what does a data point actually cost you in terms of energy use? A question we can address in another podcast, but yeah. Lots of thoughts.
Yeah, I have more. I have more thoughts, but I won't keep going. Yes, Raphael, thank you so much for joining us, man. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Norbert. Thank you, Nick. I'm excited to hear your following episodes. Keep up the good work, and hope we meet soon in Sacramento.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, and thanks for joining today.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Coffee and Technology Podcast. To learn more about Cropster, subscribe to this podcast and follow us on social media. For more educational content, visit cropster.com/learn.